Welcome to the Time Has Come podcast. My name is Graham Wardle, and today I have my good friend Tyrone Morales on the show. We dive into the transformational power of nature, the importance of integrity, and how connecting with the earth can bring you a deeper sense of fulfillment in your life. Tyrone is all about reconnecting others with the rhythm of their soul, and he uses practices like breathwork, cold water therapy, nature immersion, and herbology. My favorite part of this conversation was Tyrone's concept of glimmers, which is the opposite of triggers, where it's guidance from above showing you and nudging you in the right direction. If you're someone who's interested in harmonizing and calming your nervous system with the power of nature and reconnecting to a deeper sense of home inside yourself, then this podcast is for you. The time has come to welcome Tyrone Morales to the show. Welcome, my friends, to another episode of the Time Has Come podcast. I am joined by my friend Tyrone Morales. Tyrone, thanks for being here. How are you?
I'm wonderful, bro. Thanks for having me on the podcast and for having this conversation with you.
Yeah, man. Thanks for starting the fire.
Of course. Yeah.
I see you got your axe, you got your knives,
yeah,
wood ready.
That's my MO in all seasons. Yeah, winter, summer, spring, fall, you name it.
Going, man.
Yeah.
I love it. So for people who don't know you or what you do, can you give them a brief synopsis about what you're passionate about and what you do to serve in this world?
Yeah. My service in this world is getting people back in touch with the rhythm of their soul. I think the way that the world is right now and that I've experienced it, I've always been searching for what I would call my soul, like the voice of my soul, and trying to hear that. And life has been very busy, it felt like, for the last, 10 years. And I've been on a journey of finding that solace in myself and really finding that thread of my soul, of what I really came here to do. And I think it's something that I'm exploring, with every single season. So, but I've recognized some tools along the way that have really helped me. Some of those tools that I love to share with people are things like breath work, cold water therapy, getting out in nature immersion, and then a whole bunch of other modalities, whether it's like movement practices or getting in touch with herbology. I think a lot of it is all rooted in getting back to the earth and getting back to that connection, because I think that we have been brought up with this idea of separation, that we're separate from nature. So a lot of my path has been rediscovering that connection and finding ways to connect back to that. So it's been herbs, mythology, breath work, and just being out in the wild and enjoying that, getting back in touch with that part of myself that, as a kid, I was just so free out on the land. And I mean, out here right now too, just sitting by this fire is already igniting those feelings. So
love it. And you also work with men as well, like men's coaching, where you bring guys out into the woods and do breathwork stuff. And
I've done a few men's retreats where we've done breathwork practices, where we've done the cold water immersion, and also my friend Yvonne, your friend, Yvonne as well too. We've done some of the banyas. If anyone doesn't know what a banya is, it's essentially the Russian version of a sauna. And so we've been setting up the sauna tents by the river. I do a lot of cold water dipping. So every single Saturday, I take a bunch of people out. Well, we all meet and we go into the cold, connect back to the land. And Yvonne saw my post one day and he's like, bro, let's link up. So we've done a lot of men's work of just getting men back in touch, having conversations, getting back in touch with their feelings, getting back in touch with really their core being. Because providing a space of solace where we can really just slow down when the world is demanding so much of us. It's wonderful to find those spaces where we can really just listen. And I think that's what it comes down for me. When I talk about getting in the rhythm of your soul, it's being able to slow down and listen. And there's a story in mythology. I won't tell the whole story because it actually takes like 3 hours to tell. There is a boy who grew up in a village and his father was away and he was anxious to start hunting. And he's like, I'm ready to hunt. He's telling his mom, he's like, all right, I got the tools. I got the spears all sharpened. Like, I'm ready to go and hunt. I'm ready to kill a beast and bring it back home. And she's like, all right, you're going to go spend some time with your uncle. And his uncle brings him out to the forest. They're out in the wild, all alone. And he's like, Uncle, I'm ready to go. I could get a bear today. I could even get 2 bears today. I'm feeling like that. And his uncle was like, all right, first things first, put the spear away. I want you to just sit in the forest. And when you can tell me what the different trees are saying, and you can tell me the conversation that they're having, then you can pick up your spear. And the story continues onto a longer journey, but the story is actually called The Listener. And so part of me really resonates with that story in terms of being out in the wild. I've spent a lot of time discovering myself, just driving out into the mountains and sitting by rivers and learning to listen again. And it's through that listening that I've found so much fulfillment in my life, and also just a deepening, because I think the depths of our soul requires that deepening. It's easy for us to be chasing growth all the time. And there's an aspect of putting your roots down somewhere and getting in touch with that part of whether it's the land or a part of yourself,
How did you get interested in this? Or were you always like this as a child? Like, were you out camping with your family or Boy Scouts? Or what got you into this appreciation and connection and deeper yearning for a deeper relationship with life and the earth?
Yeah. I spent a lot of time, and when I was growing up, in our backyard, we had these big poplars, and they had all these big branches on them. And I spent most of my day just climbing trees. And I loved climbing trees. I loved playing in the dirt. There's something about that. My parents always said that I didn't really need anyone to play with because I was so immersed into my environment. I had a combination of that, and also growing up, my dad would take us out on camping trips. And then my cousins, we'd spend time out in the bush. Sometimes there's one time where we were like on these quads, and we saw a bear, and I threw a rock at this bear, and he started chasing us. And we had to hop on the quad and just go rip.
Why did you throw a rock at the bear?
I was a mischievous little kid. Yeah. I was discovering the world around me.
How old were you?
I think I was about 10 at that time.
10 years
Yeah.
old. All right. Wow.
Yeah.
Ballsy.
Very ballsy. But yeah, I've always loved just being out on the land, and grew up next to a river in a place called High River. So I spent a lot of time by the river. But I think it's inherent in all of us.
Yes.
That desire for nature. Like, anyone listening, I'm sure you can think of a time when you just felt the beauty and the abundance of nature around you. And I think there's a language that's spoken in nature. It's the language of the heart. And there's some kind of coherency, because we're constantly co-regulating our nervous systems, when we're around other people, we're constantly co-regulating. But when we get into nature, there's some kind of regulation that happens with our nervous system where we tune in. If you think of Avatar, when he puts his hair into the animal and he starts flying, I think we can do that with our heart.
With nature.
With nature. Yeah.
You've talked about this before with me, and I've heard about this. I didn't know the Japanese word. You know the Japanese word.
Oh, yeah.
For forest bathing.
Shinrin yoku.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's effectively what's happening when you're forest bathing, when you're going on a walk through the woods.
Yes.
What was the word you used?
Co-regulating.
Co-regulating?
Yeah.
So is that it's kind of like calming the nervous system, is it not?
I feel like it is.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think different landscapes will evoke different feelings as well, because I've been up top of a big rocky mountain, and there's not a relaxing feeling sometimes for me. So
in your work with men and men's retreats and people, men and women for that matter, in your cold dips as well. But I want to ask you specifically about your work with men in the men's retreats. What have you noticed that has been the benefit of, or how have they changed, I should say, when someone comes to work with you in a men's retreat and they get out into nature? What have you observed about them and how they've grown or changed? How does that shift for them?
I won't speak for all the men that have came out, but for myself, certainly, and there has been testimonials as well, but there is a deepening of our masculine core, which for me was discovered through a surrendering into the feminine aspect of nature. It really evoked a lot of that inner protector for me, of wanting to protect the beauty of nature that's around me. I used to smoke a lot of cannabis, like would spend a whole entire summer just smoking cannabis. And for me, the cannabis was a way to get in touch with my feminine, because I would be creating art, I'd be listening to music. So there's a book for anyone that's interested. It's by Robert Moore, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. And there's 4 different archetypes that are these predominant, I would say, energies, primordial energies that we have in the male psyche. And the way that Robert Moore describes it, it's the king, which governs over all of the archetypes. And then there's the lover, and then there's the warrior, and then there's the magician. And we all have different aspects of that. For me, growing up, I had a lot of warrior energy. So to balance that out was for me to get in touch with the lover. So I found I was doing that through cannabis, which in the lover archetype, you know, it's that creative expression, it's that heart space. And I found that through cannabis, but I knew that there was something more, and something that was not external to me. And being out on the land, I found that I was able to get in touch with that lover aspect, and that balanced out my warrior. I find a lot of men that come out into nature, you know, depending on what their temperament is and depending on what the activities are, you know, whether it's like if they're chopping wood, you know, we're all on a mission kind of thing, or if we're just sitting in the beauty of the landscape around us, getting in touch with the lover. If we have to find a creative solution, you know, maybe we're doing like a cold dip and we don't have an axe and we have to get into the ice, then, you know, we have to think of a creative way to get in touch and break the ice. And even in terms of the magician archetype, a lot of the old shamans of like the ancient world, the technology was consciousness. So I found that nature was a bridge to discover a lot of these parts of ourselves and to get in touch with those archetypes. So I think when men come onto these retreats, it's really a discovery process of themselves. And what it is an opening of a conversation to themselves. It's a way to re-engage and to rekindle those like deeper aspects of ourselves. So it's going to show up different for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. For a woman, they still have those 4 archetypes, but it's the queen.
Oh yeah.
Mother, magician.
Yeah. There's a similar book.
Yeah.
That's called Women Who Run with Wolves.
Okay.
And she gives a few different archetypes with that. So
very similar in that sense then?
Very similar in that sense, yeah.
I've learned a little bit about those 4 archetypes, and I think it was an exercise that Tony Robbins did where he effectively, you know, he says, you know, step into the king energy and tap the place on your body where the king is or something.
Yeah.
And then he says, what is the king saying in your life? He's kind of effectively, you channel those different aspects of yourself, or you kind of tune into them.
Yeah.
And then if you're struggling with something, you have a challenge in your life, what would the king say?
Yes.
What would the magician say?
Yeah.
What would the warrior say? And I did that, I think it was last year. And I was like, what's going on? Like, what part of me is awakened now that I'm putting attention on, and I'm allowing it to speak. And I think that's a beautiful gift when we recognize that we all have these archetypes in us, but yet they're dormant if we're not consciously communicating, building a relationship with them, incorporating them, integrating them into our lives. So I think that's fascinating. And thank you for sharing that, because I have never done a men's retreat before. I've heard of the men's retreats. I've heard of a lot of these things. I've done workshops and stuff, but I've never done a men's retreat where it's just guys sharpening, you know, each other and supporting each other through balancing of these archetypes and the different energies and where they're at in their life. I think that's super valuable. And I want to ask you about the world today and masculinity in general, what you think of toxic masculinity, what you think of healthy masculinity, what you think of men in general, and how you show up to in your own sense of masculine in this world.
I would start by saying you've been a wonderful role model for what healthy masculinity is. So shout out to you for shown up big in that way. I think, starting with the whole toxic masculinity, what I think it is really a lack of what true masculinity is. And I'm a little slow sometimes to label something as, like black or white, like how our world can think in black and white thinking a lot. And I think there's some nuance into masculinity when it comes to that topic, because it feels like there is a shadow aspect of our masculinity that inherently is really teaching us how to show up better. And I think it's become a little bit out of balance. And so I think we're on a path of seeing what that shadow aspect is.
Yeah.
And the more that we can recognize it in ourselves, the more that we're able to recognize it in the world,
And I think we can only work on ourselves, right? Like I think there's this tendency to attack the world and attack others and blame others. But it's like, how in your life are you showing up in a healthy feminine, healthy masculine way? Because we have both of these energies in us. And I think the first time I'd heard about this concept was with David Dita's book.
Oh yeah,
The Way of the Superior Man. And I'd never heard of the concept of masculine and feminine, and we both have these energies. And I really liked what he said and how he phrased it in the book. And I found myself, when I'm back in nature, when I'm connected to the earth, when I'm out in the woods, when I'm doing physical stuff too, because I do a lot of stuff on computers and I love that, it's fun. But if I don't have a healthy balance of being in my body, being in nature, I don't have a good balance of these energies in my body. And I found that when I'm out in the woods camping or sitting around a fire with friends, that my energies are like almost it's better balance. Rooted in my masculine. I go, oh wow, I feel so much more grounded. I feel so much more balanced. I think it's easy to project and blame others for the problems of the world, for, the few things, maybe you've had a bad experience with a man or a woman. And so now it's like, well, all men are bad or all women are like this. I'm concerned, and maybe it's just because I'm aware of it, but I'm concerned about that sort of tension between not every man and woman, but a lot of men and women. There's this sort of like butting heads, and there isn't an appreciation and honoring of men and of women and of the masculine and feminine in both people, right? And so I think having these kind of conversations, talking about these things, understanding them, but ultimately taking responsibility for how are we showing up individually in our masculine, in our feminine, how are we nurturing them? Like you said, are we using marijuana or something else to tap into our feminine?
Right.
Because we're uncomfortable with the actual vulnerability or the expression or the openness of that feminine energy. So we'd rather, do it by numbing ourselves with some pot or,
Right.
what I'm saying? So it's like,
Yeah.
I think and this is what I think is so interesting to really chew on, because there's a lot of people that say, this is what masculine is. This is what a man is, right?
Right.
Be a man. It's like,
yeah.
the idea that there's only one version of what it means to be a man.
Right.
That to me is the toxic thing. That to me is the imprisonment.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
absolutely.
And for each individual, man and woman, to find their own center and balance of these energies in a healthy way so that they're able to express both of them,
right,
is not an easy thing to do.
No.
And that's why I think people will project and will use drugs or use other forms to compensate for this sort of imbalance in their lives. But that's why I think the work that you're doing and many others are doing to kind of have these conversations about what it means to be a man, about what it means to be a woman, about these balance of these energies,
right,
is the inner work that we need to do.
Absolutely.
And, you know what I'm saying? Like, it starts with us.
Yeah.
And we then become examples of, as opposed to trying to force other people.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yes.
That, I think by being an example, Marianne Williamson said, when you let your light shine, you unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As you step into that higher frequency or that higher state of being,
yes,
maturity. I know when I hang out with you, it's like I have a respect and a rapport with you that I appreciate, because I know that we have a similar sense of like the importance of integrity, the importance of being a man, the importance of
right,
having honor and
yes,
being true to your word and all that different stuff. So I appreciate that about you. And I did want to talk to you about integrity and
Yeah.
authenticity. And you have a great quote. You said it to me many
Oh,
times.
yeah.
So please share the quote and let's talk about it because I love this one.
Yes. So the quote, which is from an author, Daniel Deirdre. He has a book called The Other Within. And this quote is from his work from there. And the quote is, authenticity without authority is abdication. Authenticity without authority is abdication.
So, and when you say abdication, does that mean to be?
Means to give up.
To give up.
So it's like to give up one's throne or to essentially
your power.
Your power. Yeah,
yes.
exactly. Yeah.
So to be authentic, but without authority, so without like full ownership.
Yes.
Then you are actively not sitting in your throne. You're not in integrity with yourself.
Yeah, you're not sharing your gifts with the world.
Yeah.
You could have all the gifts in the world. You could be, this heart-centered, loving person, and then you would just have no authority if you're abdicating it, and you'd be.
And what I like about that, and what I like about that is, it effectively is the ultimate authority is your authenticity.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like a lot of people, a lot of men. I'm going to speak for myself.
Yeah.
I'm looking to feel empowered. I'm looking to feel grounded and secure and confident. And what I like about that quote is that effectively reflects back to me, the most powerful I can be is when I'm authentic and owning that.
Yes.
Being in that throne and knowing that it's vulnerable, but that's my ultimate power.
Absolutely.
As opposed to abandoning that part of me.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Which on the topic of, masculinity that we're talking about, it reminds me of a book that was called No More Mr. Nice Guy. And it's this idea that a lot of men will grow up, being taught like, be a good boy, be nice. And then from that place, you go into relationships pretending to be nice so that you can get what you want. And this facade becomes a manipulation instead of behaving authentically and really, setting the boundaries or asking for what you want, speaking your truth. And so the authenticity really is your authority because you're acting from the core of who you really are. And I think that's, important, especially the authority part, because I see so many men out there that they have such an amazing heart, and there's just this aspect where they're not owning who they fully are, and they just have so many gifts. And I think as men, it starts with ourselves, like you said, taking responsibility for one's life, and it goes back to that integrity piece. And I really do think you are like the number one integrity guy around here that I know. So big respect to that.
Thanks, brother. I'm going to throw some more wood on the fire here.
Of course. I think I've made some money off of you for you keeping your word. So I love when you're in integrity.
All right, let me explain that. I said, hey, I don't want to play video games. I think it was past 12:30.
Yeah.
Something like that. 12:30. And I also want to clean up my social media feed. No thirst traps, because social media is terrible with showing men thirst traps, young, beautiful women, scantily dressed. They'll show, and it's crazy thing about this too, is they'll show you at like late at night too.
Yes.
They know. It's it's literally like it's programmed. It's crazy. Anyways, so I said to Tyrone, Tyrone, I'm going to pay you $250 every time I slip up. And I slipped up, played video games past there, and Instagram was showing me things and I was still looking at them. And I said, you know what? I gotta fess up. I told Tyrone that I wanted to, and I actually told Austin as well.
Yes.
Another friend of ours. And so I paid him by each $250 for that, to stay in integrity with myself. And this is something that I learned early on. I think it was at a workshop or something, the importance of integrity and the power of your word. And it just clicked for me. And I'm going to share it again. I think I've shared it on other podcasts, but the idea being similar to like a video game where your character has like skills, like how fast they are, all these different things, right? And the power of your word is like in like a video game, it's like there's like a meter to it. And the more you honor your word, the stronger it gets. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be perfect. If you say you're going to be there somewhere at 4 o'clock and, you're stuck in traffic, you make a call, you say, I'm going to be a little late. But if you say you're going to be there at 4 o'clock and you're off playing video games or wasting time, dilly-dallying, then you knew you could have done it and you didn't. So you've lessened the power of your word. You've weakened the power of your word with yourself and with others. So even when you say to yourself, I'm going to get up at 7 a.m. tomorrow. And if you don't do that, you're weakening your power. You're weakening your integrity with yourself. And I thought, this is interesting. And so I do my very best, and I'm still tripping up and making mistakes. But I see a tremendous value in this, because what I have found in my own personal experience is the more you honor it, the more when you say you're going to do something, it's like it's already done and it's happening.
Right.
So it's like you can speak things into existence because you've honored it. So you've built that sort of bank of integrity. So that when you say, I'm going to go do this, it's done.
Exactly.
It's gonna happen. So that's like the superpower that I absolutely love with the idea of integrity.
Yes.
In your life, and I think that was Landmark. It was a course I took. You ever heard of Landmark?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
So that was a Landmark thing. I didn't agree with everything in Landmark, but there was some really good stuff, and that was one of them that I really appreciate, the power of your word with yourself and with others, and not to be perfect.
Right.
But if something happens, you do your best. But it's like kind of like that inner honesty with yourself.
Yes. Yes.
Don't lie to yourself.
No.
You end up in so much trouble when you lose that personal integrity and that honesty with yourself. It's like, it's really hard sometimes to be honest with yourself.
Very hard. Yes.
But it pays off in the long run.
I read that one book, Radical Honesty.
Oh, I haven't read
the
that
one time. Yeah. It's, I can't remember the author's name, but it was a book to just challenging people to get radically honest with their life. It was a good one for me because it wasn't necessarily that I was always lying to myself, but that I had a hard time because I was people pleasing so much. So I would, coming back to integrity, I would sacrifice my integrity to make sure that other people felt comfortable and not say how I really felt. And I think by being honest, this is when it's coming to interacting with other people, that honesty is like, you want those friends in your life that are going to be honest with you, right? So that was like an amazing practice for me to be like, okay, am I enabling the people in my life, or am I actually, providing a mirror for them to really relate to themselves authentically? So honesty is not just one of those things that benefits one's own life, but it's for everyone around you. You're a clear mirror for the other people around you as well. And whether you're actually engaging in conversation or people see the way that you live your life and how your energy is, I think we have such an intelligence with when we see someone else, and when you're like, there's something about that person, that's the way they move or the way they're smiling today. And part of that is that inner work that you're referring to with being in integrity with ourselves. We show up so much better in the world. And then also what you said before, the more that we're in integrity with ourselves, the easier it actually is for other people to be in integrity with themselves. There's I don't know if you've heard of the theory, but it's called morphic resonance by Rupert Sheldrake. No. He's done a lot of work with Graham Hancock. Not Graham Hancock. No, it is Graham Hancock that did the fingerprints of the gods. Yeah. And so morphic resonance is this idea that each species has a collective consciousness that they all tap into. So if, say, like a crow learned how to build a nest, like imagine a crow learned how to build a log cabin out of twigs, right? And we taught that one crow how to do that. Then it would actually be easier for all crows all around the world to build log cabins.
They did this with monkeys or something too.
Yeah.
Where they taught the monkeys something and then the monkeys separated, like learned the same skill.
Yeah.
Without even being in communication or contact with the other ones.
Yeah.
That's morphic resonance?
Morphic resonance, yeah.
Wow, okay.
So I think that humans, the way that we show up, when we show up in integrity and we show up in these ways that, we're taking responsibility for our life and we're doing the inner work, the more that we do that, the easier it is for other humans around the world to do that. So I'm always asking myself,
I like that.
on a soul level, how can I show up better for myself, and what would I want to invite more of into the world? And on the basis of what we're talking about, integrity is definitely one of those things. So
beautiful, dude. I love that. I love thinking about it that way too. It's like understanding that this is like a universal law.
yeah,
And then the more inner work we do and how we show up in the world, we're effectively like feeding into this collective growth and expansion and evolution. And so people are automatically going to be benefiting from how we show up in the work that we do. You don't necessarily have to like, communicate with them because it's in that field. That's cool, man. I like that.
Yeah. And there's that one quote by Carl Jung as well, where he says some of the best political work that you can do, some of the best social work that you can do, any kind of like work that we would think is external.
Yeah.
The best work that we can do is to integrate our own shadow, which is all of the projections that we have out into the world. And so we see so much of that, like on social media, of things being externalized, and you just look in some Instagram comments and people will find it. Those
That's
projections,
exactly what most
right?
of it is Twitter or X now. It's people projecting and externalizing all these things. Yeah, man. Let's shift gears and talk about your spiritual path, how you see God or a higher power. What role does God play in your life? Do you see, do you have a higher power that you connect with? What do you call it? How do you interface with it? What's your relationship to God?
Yeah. My relationship with God is the first and foremost thing in my life that I always put first. I had a poster in my room growing up that was, do your best and God will do the rest. And I've always held true to that. So anything that I do in life, I know that when we're creating things, there's that aspect of me that has to put forth my will and has to put forth my work. And if I do my best, then I know that there is a higher power that is working behind the scenes or in the forefront of my life, that is protecting me, that is offering me grace in so many ways. And my connection with God was growing up a lot through prayer. I grew up with religious parents, so my mom was Christian and my dad Catholic, and I found myself seeking. I've explored that connection with God through so many different ways, whether it's through nature, my own kind of meditation, but there is a higher power that I find myself needing to bring to the forefront of my awareness every single day. And I love the poem by Rumi that says, like, God is a dog barking or a child laughing. And so it's just to see God in everything. And sometimes in conversation, like even right now, I'm just like, okay, there is a piece of God in Graham here. And how am I opening myself up to that relationship? And how am I allowing that to speak to me? So my relationship to God is to see it in everything and to see it in everyone and to relate to that aspect. And I mean, I forget, of course, from time to time, but those reminders throughout the day is really just nourishing for my soul. So how about you? How do you relate to?
So I'm similar, actually, very similar to you, Tyrone. I grew up in a Catholic family. Parents are still Catholic. I always was interested to watch my parents. I would go to church. I didn't understand what was going on. The priest would get up there and he'd read a story and talk about why it was important. And I couldn't understand it, but I was like, well, I think it just means like be a good person.
Right.
So I was like, all right, so this is just effectively a bunch of people coming together and we're all just sort of focusing on being a good person. And I'd watch my dad and I'd watch my mom and they would pray. And sometimes my mom would be upset about something. I guess, maybe she was upset with herself about something and she'd be praying. And she'd put her head down and she'd pray. And I was like, okay, so this is really important to her. Interesting. And I would have many conversations with my parents, specifically my mom. We'd have many conversations, long conversations about God and about faith and what happens after you die and all these different things. And so I've always been interested in it, and I'm so grateful that my parents allowed me to explore my relationship with God for myself. They never told me that I had to believe what they believed, although they encouraged me to, they wanted me to.
Right.
But they allowed me the space to find my own relationship. And I'm very, very grateful for that, because I know some people who have been turned off from a relationship to God because they had a bad experience with a particular religion or a particular church or whatever.
Right.
So it's just like, God is gone, God is out.
Right.
I'm done with that. God doesn't exist. It's just a made up thing.
Right.
And although I can't prove that God exists, I've had experiences in my life that have been super meaningful and powerful, and I deeply appreciate. And I have a litmus test that I use for many things in my life, belief systems.
Yeah.
And I always go, if I can't prove it or disprove it, how does this impact my life? So by me believing in if there's a God,
Right.
to me that enriches my life. I don't abdicate my responsibilities or my power. I still know that I have things to do. Like you said, do your best and let God do the rest. I see it only benefiting me. And the more I try to tune in, like you said, the divinity all around us, God's creation, this beautiful life, the sacredness that we have, the richer my life gets. So that's great. So I'm going to keep doing that, because that's awesome. And also, there's a lot of challenging things that happen in my life. And when that happens, I pray as well. And I tune in. And I have learned that the divine, or God, or some people call it the universe, because it's just the biggest thing that they can imagine. I don't care what you call it.
Right.
It's the place in your heart with which you connect to that is the most sacred and vulnerable and pure and open and in complete surrender to this. And that to me is the most important thing. And when you do that, in my own life, I have experienced that I get everything I need to take the next step. And it may not make sense in my mind. It may be confusing. It may actually be very scary. But that is where the work is, and that has been the most beneficial. I've never been shown a path, I can feel it in my heart and being pulled this way. And it's scary and I don't want to do it. I've never had that experience, followed that guidance, and then gone, oh, that was a waste of time. I shouldn't have done that. That was terrible. It's always been so difficult initially and then paid off in the long run, every time.
Wow.
And so I'm like, that's it. Okay. I still struggle listening sometimes.
Of course.
But I'm like, you know what? This is it, man. Like, this is the path that I'm on. Like you said, God's first. I'm like, me too. Like, it's God's plan. Like, I've had plans before. I've had things that I want to do. And
Right.
I get hung up on those things. But then ultimately I'm like, because, and I've also experienced this, because God's plan has always been 10 times better than I could have imagined.
Yes.
Right? So it's like, why? Like, I'm going to have plans. I have dreams. I have goals. I work hard. I have determination. I have discipline. Yes, you have to get up. You have to do stuff. You have to do your best.
Yes.
It's not about sitting on the couch and waiting for God to make all these things magically happen in your life.
Yeah.
You have to practice those things 100%. But then there comes this sort of like, I think it's Alan Watts who says like there's this balance between squeezing and hold it too loose. And you can drop it. You can drop the thing that you're holding, or squeeze it too tight, you kill it, or you break it or whatever.
Right.
And to me, that's the same with life. Is it's like this dance with the divine, as doing my part, but also surrendering and letting go and being open to being shown something beyond what I could have imagined.
Right.
And always looking back, I'm like, I see why I went through that. I see why this person did this. I see why this event happened. It shaped me. And because I faced it and I went into it, who I've become now is this person, and this person is able to serve in this way. And if there is a God, and there is a divine plan, God's plan, then I'm aligning with that, because it's like the way I'm growing is I'm now able to give more because I'm growing more. So that to me is like what I'm super passionate about, what this podcast is about. The time has come is about stepping into this moment of being present with yourself, what God is showing you, what the divine is showing you, however you want to say that.
Right.
However you look at that. But it's like being present in this moment of what's actually happening. What am I feeling? Am I sad? Do I feel the pull in my heart to go this way, to call this person? What has the time come for in my life right now? Right. This is an ongoing question. It's not like a one-time thing.
No.
It's a constant tuning in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
every day.
That to me is like, that's why I called the podcast The Time Has Come, because I really wanted to hone in on this. It was a time in my life where I was like man, what is going on? Like, my life is changing. I was leaving Heartland. It was early. It was actually, I think it was before COVID or just COVID. It just started.
Yeah.
Can't remember. But the world was changing. And that name popped into my head, and I was like, this is it, man. Because it's effectively just being present. Being present and then honoring yourself with that question. What does the time come for?
Right.
Is it just sitting in this moment and relaxing with a friend around a fire?
Right.
Is it starting the business that you always wanted to start? You'll know because it'll stir in your heart. You'll feel it. And it'll be like, wait, but if I take that step, what about, 10 steps down the road? How's that going? That's not no. It's just this step.
Right.
Because sometimes it's that step, and then it's like, oh, now I see a different vantage point. And it's actually now the next one's over there.
Right.
But I thought that if I took this step, I'd have to go all the way to that way.
Yeah.
It's not that. So anyways, that's my relationship with God, and my sort of passion for life is, like I said, I can't prove it, but man, is it rich and beautiful and sacred.
Yeah.
When I'm able to do my best and let God do the rest and just surrender.
Yeah.
To life.
I feel like the fruits of your actions and the way that all these people in your life really appreciate you, like both Austin and I have so much appreciation for just the light that you've brought into our lives. And a lot of, the fruits of your actions are the things that are like the joy, the fulfillment, and all of those things. I think that in itself is so evident of you and that relationship that you have with God. And like you said, you can't prove it, but, look at the fruits of your life, and the fruits of your life, like, are amazing. Like, I just think you're such a solid character. And so just, by the fruits alone, I'm like, of course, this man is connected with what I would consider God, and presence that I feel when I'm in your presence as well too. You reflect that back to me. And I think through that connection, I can feel how grounded you are in those things, and how much of a foundation that you've built for that in your life. And it's a beautiful mirror. So thank you for showing up for that way in the world, bro.
Thanks,
yeah,
man.
it's amazing.
And same to you, man. I really appreciate our conversations, and we've had many conversations, chats, and I'm happy to be doing this podcast with you, because we kind of finally get to share one of the kind of the richness of our conversations where we talk about these things. And I see that in you as well, and I appreciate that about you as well in your expression of life. And I'm constantly inspired by, like we were talking earlier, just men's retreat work you do, getting out in nature, cold dips. You're obviously much more experienced than I am.
Which is ironic, because I got Caribbean blood. So
You're from Trinidad, right? Your dad's from
my dad's from Trinidad, yeah. But to be fair, my mom's side has the Nordic roots, so can tap into both there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice, dude. So one of the questions I ask everybody on my podcast is about guidance. And when you hear God's guidance in your life, what is that like for you? How do you experience it? Is it a knowing? Is it a pull in your chest? For everyone, it's a little different. Sometimes it shows up differently for each person in different moments. So for you, what does God's guidance feel like in your life, and how do you experience it?
For me, it's a sense of knowing. I know that a lot of people talk about things like clairaudience, where they hear God's voice.
Oh, yes.
Or there's kinesthetic, where they just feel it in their body. There's a few different ways through our senses, and I think it goes beyond our five senses. For me, it does show up a lot of the time as this inner knowing. It's when I ask the question, I listen, and there just becomes this peace within me where I'm like, right, I know what to do. And it just becomes clear for me. It's not always like an image in my mind. It's more like a sensation and a peace in my listening that I find. And so a lot of times when I'm going through challenges in life and I'm seeking guidance, I know like the first step for me is to take a big deep breath. Just slow down is one of the biggest things, and to really find that discernment between my own stories that I've created in my life, whether it's like I'm like testing the authenticity of the voices. Sometimes I'll be like, ask a question, and then I'll hear all these different answers, and I'm like, it's like the litmus test that you talked about.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, that's not it. That's not it. And then when I become really silent and I don't even focus on the answer, it just comes.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, that was it.
And when that answer comes, how do you know that's it? Because a lot of people will go, like, how do I know? Like, and for me, sometimes my brain kind of tries to trick me.
Right.
Yeah, this is the answer. This is the answer.
Yeah.
So how do you experience that? Like, no, this is the answer. Like,
Right.
when you know it's the right one. It's not your mind tricking you.
Yeah. A lot of it does come back to integrity, like what we were talking about before, when you know if you're being honest with yourself or
Yes.
not.
Yeah,
There's that kind of sensation when you know that you're lying to yourself almost. But for me,
well, we're gonna take a little break here.
let me toss on another log here.
For those of you who can't see what's going on, we lost our light.
We gotta light down.
It's a little windy. Little commercial break.
Oh, commercial break.
Commercial break. It happens. It happens when you're shooting outside. You know, most people have podcast studios indoors.
Exactly.
We like to shoot outside. Now we got our light back. What were we talking about?
Yeah.
So how do you experience the answer?
How do you experience the answer?
Yeah.
And I feel like it is events like what just happened, the light falling down. There's certain things that happen in my life sometimes, and a big part of it was when I was actually doing landscaping. I used to be working this landscaping job, and I would be riding the mower, and I remember one day I kept seeing this robin, and this robin kept showing up, and I was going through a lot of changes in my life, and there's just times where I was like, I would ask a question, and I'm just wandering on the mower, and then this robin would keep showing up, and I'm like, what is it trying to tell me? Like, what's the answer here? And my mind would try to intellectualize it, right? You talked about how the mind tries to play tricks on things. And one of the good quotes that I heard from this guy, David Abrams, from this book, it's called The Spell of Sensuous. And he says, sometimes the mind will try to intellectualize the wisdom that we receive from the natural world before the heart has a chance to actually integrate that wisdom. And so for me, it's this sense of coherence that I feel. It's like the same peacefulness that you'll feel when you're gazing at a sunset. You take a deep breath, or you're just looking out at the ocean and there's some kind of calmness. And I think that's that like coherence that our heart feels when we're like, oh yeah, I'm connected with all this. And so for me, that guidance shows up as my heart and my mind and my soul all feeling like they're doing the same dance. And so it would be like asking someone like, how do you know if you're doing this dance right? And you can't intellectualize it. You just feel it. You're just like, oh no, that felt right. Like that felt so right. And then when you're in that state, you just know how to move your body, the rhythm. And for me, being in tune with that rhythm is that guidance. And I think that shows up for me in my life at certain times. A lot of the cold dips that I've done, I've been asking God for guidance. I'm like, God, help me to show up stronger in my life. Like, I've really been struggling lately. Like, is this really for me? So there was this one time when I took people out for the first time cold dipping. And a week before that, I was gifted this eagle feather. And it was for doing this 4-direction ceremony. And there were some elders that gifted me this eagle feather. They're like, all right, it's time for you to, start sharing your gifts with the world. And after that, I had actually given that eagle feather to Austin because he had a condor feather. And there's this whole prophecy that the eagle and the condor will fly together at one time, which is the balancing of our masculine and our feminine spirit. So I was like, I feel like I have to gift this to Austin. And it felt good. It felt right. It felt like the right guidance. I saw the signs that were out there and I felt the coherency, and like I just knew I had to give it to him. So a week later, I had some friends visiting from out of town. They're like, hey, I've seen you doing these cold dips on Instagram. I'd love for you to take me and a whole bunch of people out for a cold dip. And this is my first time taking people out for the cold dip. So I was like, okay, like I'll take you guys. I know a sweet spot. And this whole time I'm having this imposter syndrome come up. I'm like, who am I to take these people out onto a cold, water immersion experience? And it was right before we hopped into the water. I was like, man, like I feel like I'm struggling with this, God, and I don't know if this is the right path for me. And I was like, but I'm gonna trust you, and these people are here. I'm doing this. So I take the people into the cold. I dunk my head into the water, and I explained it to them. I was like, sometimes it kind of feels like a baptism, not in a religious sense, but in a sense of like renewal and reconnecting with the currents and the rhythms of life. And as soon as I came out of the water, after having those thoughts and explaining it to the people that way, I walk out onto the shore of the river, and standing upright on the beach is this eagle feather.
Oh, crazy.
And I was like, okay, God, I hear you. And for me, the eagle is like very symbolic of that higher vision and taking responsibility for one's own life, and also a symbol of, being like, hey, like this is the path. This is for you. And so
I love
that guidance for me shows up, when going back to do your best and God will do the rest. And sometimes the questions are the answers. I always like to say it's the quest I on. And so I think that there's beauty in the questions that we ask, especially when it comes to guidance, and the guidance is in the longing. And I think the longing for that guidance is something that God put in our heart for us to alchemize what's in our life. And that longing is part of God's guidance. And I don't always need to have an answer with the guidance. So it kind of becomes this rhythmic dance with life for me of courting the mystery. And that to me is part of the guidance, is the pathless path sometimes.
I love that, dude. And thanks for sharing that, because that's a gift to me, because I've never connected the idea, and I like what you said. I'm just going to rewind to it.
Yeah.
He says, like, viewing a sunset and you knowing that's beautiful.
Yeah.
There's no, like, mental checklist that you're going through, like, well, the colors are this is the... It's just, it. It's just deep in you. Yeah. And so what I love about this is now that's another sort of tuning. It's almost like a tuning thing for a tuning dial. Yeah. Tuning my instrument of my being. The more I can align myself with the beauty of God's creation, that is the same frequency of aligning with God's guidance. Yes. You feel this peace, this wonder, this awe, this, magnificence and beauty and dance of it. Like you said, it's like, there's no like, oh, did I do the dance right? It's like, I had a good time. Like I was in the flow with it. Yes. I like that, man. I really do. And there is a peace that comes from it, even though it can be scary sometimes. Yes. With the guidance that is received, that I've received. It can be scary, but there is like a deep, weird sort of peace within it. Right. So thank you for sharing that, dude. I appreciate that.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I think of it, a lot of the people are like, oh, you've been triggered by this, or like, what are your triggers? And I like to think of it sometimes in the flip of like, what are your glimmers? Those like little, like, I call them like, they're like little heart flutters that you get sometimes where you're like, oh, this feels right. Yeah. And you're like, oh, okay, that feels good. Little glimmers. Yeah, little glimmers.
So it's the opposite of a trigger.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome, dude. Okay, so the last question I always ask my guests on my podcast is my magic painting question. And so, have I asked you this before?
We'll find out.
Okay. So the question goes like this. I came up with it when I was bored on set one day before cell phones. We were just hanging out. Yes. Now, if you've already answered it, because I can't remember your answer, you can either answer it the same, or in this moment, you can tune in and feel whatever it is you want to answer. Okay. So the question goes like this. If Tyrone had a magic painting on the wall, that whenever he looked at this painting, he can feel any type of feeling that he wanted to feel, to any degree that he wanted to feel it, what feeling would you choose? And what would be on your painting to represent that? It could be abstract, or it could be an actual scene.
Yeah. It still feels like the painting that I do have on my wall right now. Okay. and which is a wonderful reminder for me because it's been up there and I haven't looked at it as of recently, as a reminder for myself. The painting is called The Inherent Nobility of Man, and I'd seen it when I went to Trinidad, when I went to visit in Trinidad, and we went to a museum there, and it was by this artist who very much I resonated with a lot because he was half he was a bicultural, what we could call. So he came from two different kind of cultures, and a lot of his work reconciles what would seem like two very contradicting things.
Okay.
And so in that painting, there is a lot of that reconciliation that I felt came through. But if anyone Googles The Inherent Nobility of Man, it's a beautiful painting that really shows how man can transform and grow from the environment around him. So it shows him with his hands out, and he's almost like floating into the air, just like that, like freedom, that kind of feeling and sensation.
So that's the feeling, is freedom?
Is freedom, yeah. And there is that, the title itself, The Inherent Nobility of Man, which for me is that inherent part in every single one of us, that no matter what your life's conditions are, like you have that nobility within you. You have that ability to transform and to create gold in your life, no matter what it is. And every single human on earth is worthy of that nobility to shine their brightest. And for me, that's what that freedom is because whatever happens in your environment, you're able to transform that into that sensation of nobility, knowing that you're a sovereign person, knowing that that freedom is built within you. And so, yeah, that painting resembles so much of that for me, that no matter what my circumstances are in life, I can always carry myself with that dignity and with that nobility, and to keep my head up high and to live with an open, wide heart and shine my light.
The feeling is freedom?
The feeling's
Tell
freedom.
me more about the feeling when you look at that painting.
Woo. Yeah, it's chest wide open.
Chest wide open.
It's chest wide open, arms wide open. And it evokes this sense of empowerment through vulnerability.
Ooh.
Like
What does that feel like?
Oof. I mean, it feels like, I have my heart, my hands are out here, like my heart is exposed to the world.
Ah, okay.
And it's like the sensation of like, when you're walking through a forest at night and you're like, oh, what's that sound? Like, what is that sound?
Yeah.
And it's how like our mind is capable of creating all of these different fears, right? But when you can walk into that forest at night and you can just walk wide open and be like, no, like my light is too bright for anything to come near me, and you know that you're protected, and you know that you're blessed, like that's the sensation. And it just feels like I'm like open, I'm like playful almost, like in my body it's just like this feeling of like all my cells tingling, wherever there is tension, which goes back to what you're talking about before about that grasping. It just opens right up. And so I've actually done those forest walks at night and practiced this feeling because I'm like creating all these things in my mind. So like from a somatic level, I'm like, okay, yeah, this feels like, a loosening. And also with that authority as well too, of being like, no, like I'm able to be vulnerable, but I'm also, in a position where I can shine and be okay. So
awesome.
Yeah, it feels safe in my body, safe to be big. Yeah.
Safe to be big.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that, man. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks for being on the podcast. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up? This has been awesome. I'm glad it worked, other than our light falling over, but those things happen.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to share before we wrap up?
Gratitude for you. And I think every single thing that we talked about, especially when we talked about, seeing God in other people and how does God show up for guidance in your life. When you asked me to be on the podcast this morning, I just know that me taking this little step, when you're like, yeah, just take the little step. For me, this conversation has been that step. And even just you being in my life, I'm incredibly grateful for. Austin and I were talking about that before, where we're like, yep, like you bring this like magician energy, but also we have our warrior chants as well too, right? But also just like simply a human being who I love and admire and I'm incredibly grateful to have in my life. So I'm grateful for this time with you and for everybody tuning in, for being a part of that. But I just love the way that you invite people to show up big in their lives and to show up with that authenticity. And I'm glad to be a part of it. So just gratitude is all I got to express, man. Yeah.
Love
what
you,
can
bro.
I say but thank you? Yeah.
Awesome, guys. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Cheers. That's it, folks. That's all. Thank you for watching this episode all the way to the end. Tyrone, thank you, sir, for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I loved all your words of wisdom and your insights, especially the glimmers. I'm going to keep my eye out for more glimmers in my life. Signs from above. I love that, man. I also want to say thank you to each and every one of you who have donated to this show, because it makes it possible. I couldn't do it without you. There's a lot of costs associated. I'm doing my best to be as efficient as I can with the resources that I have. But there are a number of you out there who have donated to each and every one of my podcasts, and I really appreciate it, because this wouldn't be possible without you. So I do want to say a word of caution, though. There's most likely somebody in the comments of this video below or somewhere around on social media that's talking to you pretending to be me, or somebody that represents me, like a management team or an agency. It's not me. Or even, if you've been scammed, they're pretending to be cybersecurity experts. They're going to help you get your money back. They think of endless ways to try and get you to give them money. So be very, very careful out there. I'm not chatting with you. There's no cybersecurity experts that are in the comments trying to help you get your money back from another scammer. They're the same people trying to scam you. So please be aware. There is a place where you can donate to my podcast to help this show grow and reach more people, and that's GrahamWardleOnline.com. Under the podcast section, there is a button to donate. So if you would like to support the show, I would be most grateful. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Thank you so much. Good night.